In a previous book, The Stage Life of Props, you considered physical stage objects. In this new book, Dark Matter, you study immaterial things that are just as important to the drama as material props. What got you interested in writing about invisible things in theatre?
Well, the first book was fun because I came at it from my experience in the theatre as an actor and as a director, which was my profession in my 20s. And when I worked in the theatre, I noticed that everybody, directors, designers, actors, were obsessed with props, obsessed with physical objects. Were they going to work? Where were they? Could we get one that was designed correctly? Did the guns fire? Would they fire in rehearsal? Would they fire in performance? So props are a little bit of an obsession for theater practitioners. And when I came to look around for a dissertation topic, the idea of objects came to me as something that are so important in the theater, but that were being talked about in theater criticism as if they were abstract, as if they were static symbols. And I thought they were more interesting and more dynamic and more mobile, and I wanted to capture some of that mobility. So my book, The Stage Life of Props, which you mentioned, which grew out of my dissertation, was my attempt to see what happened if we could focus on this very material, concrete aspect of theater that was still very mobile, very unpredictable, that traveled in time, inside a play, from play to play, from playwright to playwright. And I came to the conclusion that props were time machines of the theater, really, that they were ways for playwrights to really interrogate theater history and ways for actors to explore character in new ways. And it turned out to be a really rewarding project for me. And when I finished that book, I really wasn't quite sure where to go next. So I just started looking at things that interested me in plays, and it struck me that I had been looking at a number of different kinds of things that were in a kind of in-between space. They were in the play, but they weren't necessarily on the stage. So, for example, a central character who didn't appear, or a bug, a listening device that was hidden in the ceiling, or a world of black magic, a world of the supernatural. And as I started collecting these pieces, it struck me that I really didn't have a vocabulary for talking about unseen objects, unseen characters, unseen actions, and that might make an interesting book, because every time I don't have a vocabulary for talking about something that interests me, I think, there might be a book in here, because part of the delight and the challenge of writing a book is to try and find a vocabulary for something that you notice or you're curious about, but that there isn't a received language out there that can really do justice to it.
Andrew, you discussed how playwrights' use of what is not there, yet not there, still exerts a strong gravitational pull. Can you explain what you mean and give examples?
Well, this is exactly what dark matter is in my definition. It's the invisible dimension of theater that is present in the imagination of the audience but isn't concretely realized on stage. So a very famous example of that would be the central character or a central character who never appears on stage. And probably the most famous example of that in the modern theater is Godot in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, which, as everybody knows, is a play about two tramps in the middle of nowhere who are convinced that this man Godot that they have an appointment with is going to show up, and they wait and they wait and they wait, and he never does, and they never leave, and they try to leave. But the idea that Godot is going to come keeps them anchored in this purgatorial state of waiting. And of course, if Godot actually showed up, it would ruin the play. So he's a marvelous example for me of dark matter, because to me, Godot is not there in the play. He's not physically present. He never arrives. There's no actor, but he's not there either. He's part of the fabric of the play, and he is actually the gravitational pull that holds the tramps to their tree, that keeps them rooted in this terrible situation that they're in of waiting for a salvation that is always just out of reach, or always just out of view, or always just withheld. So it allows Beckett to really share with the audience this experience of frustration and boredom and waiting and obsession and yearning for change, salvation, rescue, answers. So Godot is a wonderful example. I don't actually talk much about Godot in my book because he's such a familiar character and he's such a familiar figure that I thought it would be more interesting to look at some other things that are not there but not there. So another example that I talk about early on in my book is Macbeth's famous dagger. So when Shakespeare's Macbeth is on his way to murder the king, he is suddenly faced with this hallucination, this dagger that is hanging there, beckoning him towards the murder. And it's very difficult to say where that dagger is because for Macbeth, it is absolutely there. It can't not be there. He has to see it. He can't close his eyes and make it go away. It's always just hovering. And he tries to grasp it, and his hand goes right through it. But he can't do anything to make it go away. So from Macbeth's point of view, it's absolutely part of his experience. It's absolutely part of the play. And I think we in the audience, although we don't see it, share in that terror, share in that horror, share in that sense of uncanniness and hauntedness and ghostliness and ethereality. And the dagger takes on a power that it couldn't possibly have if it was a literally present object on the stage. And there are some filmed versions of Macbeth that do actually have a dagger in that scene, and it makes all the air go out of the scene, because as soon as you realize that prop and make it literal, it loses its uncanniness. It loses its power to really haunt our imagination. And that's what interests me in the not there, not there, these things that are part of the fabric of the play. They're woven into the experience of the character. They're woven into the experience of the audience. It's just that we can't see them. We can't touch them. They're always elusive for some reason.
When I think of the phrase dark matter, I think of physics. Would you say a little more about this scientific connotation? And a related question, can you say how you came to discuss A Midsummer Night's Dream in terms of quantum mechanics?
Yes, well, when I was trying to find a good analogy or a good metaphor for these phenomena that I was writing about, things that are not there but not there on stage, it came to me that dark matter was really perfect because in physics, dark matter refers to this invisible, non-luminous mass that pervades the universe. We can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't really measure it, but we know it's there. And not only do we know it's there, but it's actually most of what is there. That is to say, I think scientists estimate that something like 80 to 95% of the matter that's in our universe is dark. It doesn't emit light, it doesn't emit X-rays, it doesn't emit any kind of radiation at all. It's this mysterious, invisible glue that is holding the visible world together, but scientists have no idea what it is, which is delightful. So for me, what makes the analogy work, and it is an analogy, of course, is that how do we know that dark matter exists? Well, we know it because we can observe its effects, its gravitational effects on the things that we do see. So, for example, dark matter was originally posited to explain why rotating galaxies don't fling themselves apart. There has to be some kind of glue that's holding them together. There's some kind of matter there. We see gravitational pull. We don't see what's pulling. So again, we say, well, it must be this mysterious dark matter. Who knows what it's made of? But there it is. It's definitely there. And in the theater, the invisible phenomena that I write about can only be known by their gravitational effects on the characters, by their gravitational effects on the world of the play. So we see the invisible dagger's effect on Macbeth. We see the effect of the invisible Indian boy, this mysterious figure of desire in A Midsummer Night's Dream that both king and queen want to get their hands on, but we never actually see him, this Indian boy. We see his effect. We see how his gravitational force exists a tremendous pull on the world of the play. So it's as if there are these invisible magnets that are holding the iron filings of the play together, and that's what I wanted to find a vocabulary for talking about, to try and explain some of their uncanny power. So the question of how I got to quantum mechanics and writing about A Midsummer Night's Dream is also interesting, and obviously I'm not qualified to do science. But what struck me while I was exploring the metaphor of dark matter was how apt some of the scientific concepts were for describing these strange phenomena that I was looking at, like the characters who behave like regular people when we see them on stage, but when we don't see them, their offstage lives exist in what quantum physics likes to call superposition. That is to say, characters that we don't see can seem to be in different states of being simultaneously, just as a quantized particle can be in two places at once. So Bottom the Clown in A Midsummer Night's Dream is a great example. He has this strange love affair once he's transformed into a donkey with Queen Titania, and we see them in a love scene in Act 3, and we see them in a love scene in Act 4, but we don't see what happens between those two scenes, and in fact, it's very difficult to tell if any time has elapsed, if this is one continuous scene, or if there's some kind of erotic encounter between these acts. So we just can't tell what happens between these two characters, between Acts 3 and Act 4. And so I argue in my book that, in a sense, their erotic encounter both happens and doesn't happen in the play. We can keep both of those possibilities in mind in some way without them necessarily canceling each other out, and that's part of the game that Shakespeare is playing with the audience. He's playing with the indeterminacy of the dramatic arcs of these offstage characters. And this is, it seemed to me, quite similar to the way that quantum physicists describe the subatomic world, which only looks a certain way because it's being observed, in the same way that, let's say, light looks like a wave if you ask it wave-like questions, but it looks like a particle if you ask it particle-like questions. The same thing can be said, perhaps, of some dramatic characters. They look like regular people when you ask them certain questions, but then they look like very, very strange sorts of creatures when you ask them different sides of questions. There are characters in Shakespeare who have different lives in different versions of the play. So, for example, we have 3 versions of Hamlet that made it into print in Shakespeare's day, and Hamlet's trajectory in each play is a little bit different. So he is a kind of unstable particle, you might say. In one version of the play, he encounters Fortinbras's army marching across Poland, and he has a very famous soliloquy that he delivers. And in the other 2 editions of the play, that encounter just doesn't happen. So we can't say that there's a single real Hamlet behind those 3 avatars of Hamlet. We just have to say, well, we have these 3 different textual versions, and they exist in slightly different versions of the same world. And again, there's a nice analogy in physics, because some physicists have claimed that every time we reach a fork in the road, the universe splits and a new universe begins. So that all possible trajectories actually happen. They just happen in different parallel worlds. It's called the many worlds hypothesis. So again, this seems to me a kind of nice analogy for some of the indeterminacies that are being played with in drama, especially modern drama. So I invent this term called quantum dramaturgy. And what I mean by quantum dramaturgy is the kind of play or the kind of theatrical world where characters don't have definitive offstage trajectories. When we're not looking at them, the world of cause and effect, or the laws of cause and effect, can be suspended in a similar way to the way that the subatomic world becomes a world of probability, a cloudy world, a fitful world, a world where we can't really speak in certainties about where a particle is or isn't. When we're not looking at it, it's going to behave in a different way than when we are looking at it.
You begin the book with a powerful retelling of the medieval Passion play of the three Marys' visit to the sepulchre on Easter morning, where they see the empty tomb. You discuss how the real presence of Christ is paradoxically guaranteed by his felt absence. Can you say a little about this?
Yes, well, this is an extraordinary instance of dark matter for me because, of course, we should remember that the medieval drama in England was a religious drama. It was an Orthodox drama, and it was very much, I think, taking place in the shadow of the Eucharistic controversies about the real presence in the Eucharist, and this medieval festival, the festival of Corpus Christi, developed in the Middle Ages in order precisely to celebrate Christ's real presence in the Eucharist after consecration. And the climax of these long plays, or cycle plays, really, I mean, there were many plays that were performed over time that retold the stories of the Old Testament and the New, culminate in telling, sometimes in very graphic detail, the story of Christ's passion and resurrection. And the climax of the Passion play was where, indeed, the three Marys go to the tomb on Easter morning, and they meet the angel, and the angel asks, "Who do you seek?" And the three Marys say, "We seek Jesus of Nazareth." And the angel takes away the stone or reveals the sepulchre with a flourish, and there's no body. And that moment of showing the absence of the body is the ocular proof of the resurrection, so that the real presence is guaranteed by the felt absence. And to me, that is really the paradox of theater itself, the paradox of the way that theater can make so real what isn't physically manifested there, that something that is not physically represented on stage can become absolutely central to the experience of an audience, whether it's religious faith, whether it's uncanny terror, as in Macbeth, whether it's a kind of absurdist comedy, as it is in Waiting for Godot, which I suppose you could say is a sort of passion play, perhaps. So that seemed to me a very, very good example, and the reason why I started off the book with it. It seemed to me a very, very good example of how what is not shown, what the playwright decides not to show, can be the absolutely crucial event of a theatrical experience.
The structure of the book is perhaps a little unusual. You begin with the medieval period and move on to contemporary drama and performance. Can you talk a little about how you decided to structure the book?
I wanted to give readers a flavor of how playwrights and audiences in different periods of theatrical history experience dark matter. And because the idea of the book is really quite general, that is to say, invisible phenomena of the dark matter of theater, it really only comes to life once you're looking at specific instances of it. I wanted to really look at how specific examples of dark matter emanate a kind of power, both in the fictional world of the play and also over the audience that's looking at it. And as a theater historian, I've always been interested in how the first audiences reacted to these plays when they were performed in their own time. Works that seem classic to us now might have been experienced as very exciting, very strange, very dangerous when they were first performed, or simply confusing. So that's certainly how the professional Elizabethan playing companies in London were viewed when they began in the 1560s, 1570s, people weren't really sure what this new mode of professional entertainment was. There wasn't a tradition of professional playgoing at the time. So one of the plays I write about in the book is Marlowe's Doctor Faustus, and the fact that certain audiences watching this play hallucinated an extra devil on stage in this play about black magic and fled the theater. And again, I got very interested in that as an example of how dark matter can perhaps burst onto the stage as hallucination. And I really was trying to take it seriously and think, well, what was it about the way that Elizabethans thought that made them prone to such kinds of hallucinations? So what I did in the book was to take 6 examples of dark matter, 6 different plays or groups of plays, situate them in a particular historical period, and try to account for their peculiar power in the theater of its own day, in the theater of their own day. So the book is divided into 6 case histories, really, in which I pick a locus of dark matter, and I try and reconstruct what made the not there so powerful, so compelling, so unusual in that particular instance.
Andrew, what would you like the reader to take away from the book?
I think that audiences know when they're watching a play that what they don't see is as or more important as what they do see. I think it's something that we tend to forget when we read about theater. When we read about theater, we tend to focus, or write about theater, we tend to focus on the visual, because it's the visual that really comes to mind when we think about our theatrical experience. So you might say we privilege the visual in some way. So what I would like the reader to take away is a kind of recognition, I think, a kind of recognition of what happens to him or her when he or she is in the playhouse and is really in the grip of a theatrical experience that incorporates things that are seen, things that are unseen, things that are heard off stage, events that are narrated but never occur, things that may be hidden on or off stage. So what I'm hoping is that the reader will have a certain amount of recognition, but also a certain amount of novelty in terms of having his or her attention drawn to things that perhaps might not be the first thing that he or she would think about when thinking about Doctor Faustus, or when thinking about A Midsummer Night's Dream, or when thinking about a contemporary play. So what I'm hoping is that the reader will get back in touch with that imaginative dimension of theater that is really motivated when the lights go out and you're in the dark and you're imagining what might be there.